In this video, we will go through your daily routine. Your daily routine is a series of movements that target the muscles from the head to the toes. We'll perform one set of each movement. Think of it as an elongated warm-up. This routine would be great to do on the days that you don't have a workout, or as you build your fitness capacity. If later on in the day, say you do a morning workout, later on in the day you feel like you need to do a little bit more movement, you could go through your daily routine, either part of it or all of it, as an additional bonus of intentional movement. As we go through this series, you'll find that you don't need much space. Some of the movements I'll be moving across the screen. If you don't have that much space, that's perfectly fine. You could do everything stationary. You'll also want some solid surface to sit on. And with this surface, it is ideal that you'd be able to have your feet up off the ground. So that could be something, a high bench, or a chair, or some surface that you put firm cushions on, where it is, again, elevating you so your legs are hanging. If that is not an option, that's okay. You'll just see for some of the movements, it's nice to not have to pull that leg up before performing some of the seated movements. You'll also want either, again, that solid surface or a wall as support. And some of those movements, you may need some support at the beginning and later on not. But again, some solid surface, a wall would be perfect for that support. And then lastly, we have a portion of the daily routine that is ground-based, or where you're laying on some form of a flat surface. So the ground would be fine if you're able to get down to the ground and up off the ground. Or if you're at home, you could use a firm bed, a firm couch. If you're at the gym and there's a table, that would be great too. So something that you feel comfortable laying down on and getting up off of. And if that's not something that you're able to do yet, that's perfectly fine. You can omit that portion of the ground-based segment and just know that as your strength and fitness capacity increases, that will be a component that we'll want to add in. All right, so from here, I'll name the movement and perform it. Talk about what makes good form, where we want to feel that the muscles activate, as well as maybe some common compensations, ways that the body might try to perform the movement that isn't optimal, and then we'll perform the movement together. First up, we have your knee hug. This will be an alternating knee hug where you're in this upright standing position. The goal is to keep your chest tall, to bring your knee up as high as you can, as well as your toe up. Hug, and then return back down to the ground with control. A couple pointers would be fixing your eyes on something stationary ahead of you, and then taking some time here where both feet are on the ground in between reps to make sure you're regaining your balance. Sometimes we can start to rush this movement and have a little bit of side-to-side sway, but you want to make sure you plant that foot, everything stays locked in place, and then you bring that other knee up. Another compensation that I see often would be when you're bringing your knee up, that you're actually bringing your chest down to meet it. Go ahead and keep your torso in a nice neutral position, bringing your knee up as high as you can. So if it's not all the way up, that's perfectly fine. Over time, as you get both the hamstring mobility as well as the confidence to pull that knee all the way up, which requires more balance, you'll be able to achieve a greater range of motion. We're gonna go ahead and put 20 seconds on the clock, and we'll perform our knee hugs together. Next up, we have your quad pull. Your quads are the muscles on the front of your legs, and so we're going to stretch those out by reaching up with one hand, reaching back with the other foot, and the goal is to point your knees straight down. We'll perform a short pause in this position before switching or alternating sides. As you perform this, just like with your knee hug, there requires some balance, and so fixing your eyes on something straight ahead is ideal. And then we want to make sure also from a balanced position that this arm is straight up, not out in front or behind. So if it's straight up, that will assist in your balance. And then we want to make sure that your knee is pointed straight down. And so from the front view, we could see sometimes what will happen is the knee will come out to the side, but there again, we want to make sure it's pointed straight down and that we're getting that good quad stretch. From the side, one extra tip or cue would be to activate your glute. And so if we're bringing this heel back, but we're kind of staying in this bent hip position versus glutes active, so we're pushing our hip through. If we're in this bent position, we're missing out on some of that stretch. If we can activate that glute, and this would just be glute activation, short pause at the top, you'll feel a much deeper stretch through your quadricep muscles group. So if your hip stays slightly bent, then there again, we're missing out on that full quadricep stretch. So we're gonna go ahead and put 20 seconds on the clock. Again, fix your eyes on something stationary. We'll reach straight up and then straight down with that opposite knee. And begin. From here, we'll move on to your side steps. So for this movement, we want your toes straight ahead, slight bend in the knees and the hips. And we're gonna reach across and then reset to a hip width base. Again, reach across, return to that hip width base. Oftentimes, we'll load this movement with a mini band. Here, we're just working on activating, feeling our body in space, knowing that everything's doing its job. So a couple common compensations would be as you're reaching to rotate your toes, again, we want to keep those toes straight ahead. We'll also see some up and downward movement. So each step, there might be this up, down, up. We want to maintain a constant hip height. So we'll get set up here. So reaching across and then that reset. So you're staying low the entire time. And then another compensation or error, I would say, is reaching out. Sometimes we forget to keep tension in this outer leg muscles, our abductors, and so the knee collapses in. So we want to make sure that, especially since we don't have any external resistance, that we're very mindful of driving our knees out and staying strong as we're performing the side steps. I want to show you real quick the side view of this movement. So when we're bending at the knees and hips, we want to keep our weight back over our midfoot as opposed to driving our knees forward, sinking down, and putting a lot of extra stress on our knee joint. So again, this is the position we want to be in versus sinking and letting those knees take on more than they're designed to. So for this movement, we'll get set up. You can either take several steps over, several steps back for the 20 seconds, or over and back in one small area. So I'm gonna do 2 steps over, 2 steps back, just to keep it fairly even. We'll put 20 seconds on the clock and we'll begin. Next up is our tin soldier. For this movement, we'll again keep a nice neutral spine as we reach out opposite arm, opposite leg with our knee in a straight position or just slightly, I like to call it unlocked. So your knee's not locked out, but there's a slight bend and it's almost unnoticeable. What we want to make sure we don't do is to kick up thinking that we're touching our toes, but our knee is super bent. So it'd be better to get to this point and have your knee straight than to actually touch your toes and bend your knees. So we're working on hamstring flexibility here. We're going to get that as long as we keep our legs straight. So opposite arm, opposite leg, just like with our knee hug, we want to make sure that we're not bringing our torso down. Our torso will stay in an upright position and we'll kick that leg up as high as we can. So let's go ahead and put 20 seconds on the clock. We'll get set up for our 10 soldiers and we'll begin. Next up is our body weight squat. For this movement, we'll want to assume a stance a little bit wider than hip width. It can be helpful to slightly rotate out your toes versus keeping them straight ahead. From here, we want to drive our knees out and sink our hips down, and then we'll return back up to that upright position. Throughout the entire movement, you want to keep your spine in a neutral position versus as you go down, starting to lose that and round. So I like to start with my hands out in front. As I sink down, I reach out, I drive back up. It's a good reminder to keep my core active when I'm here at the top. Everything's active just like in a plank position. And then again, I return right back down to ideally parallel or a little bit lower on the squat. So from the side here, so when you sink down, keeping this neutral spine and returning upright versus going down, almost bouncing out of the bottom and then coming up. So we want to make sure we have a nice crisp end point and starting point each repetition. We're going to go ahead and put 20 seconds on the clock and we'll cycle through our body weight squats. From here, we'll go into our reverse lunge. For this movement, we'll reach back with one leg, and the opposite arm from the remaining leg will come up as a counterbalance. From here, we'll return all the way back up to our standing position, and then we'll switch sides. As we perform this movement, our lead leg, so the leg out in front, should be carrying most of the weight. That means we don't want to transfer our weight to that back foot, but keep a slight forward lean. If you imagine a sprinter, they have this forward lean in their torso angle. That's what we want so that we can drive with this front leg back to our standing position. We'll switch and again come back upright. At the very top, we want to feel your glutes, core, shoulders, neck muscles, everything active as we look straight ahead. Oftentimes, especially if we're trying to rush a movement, we can get stuck in this hip flexed position where we don't come all the way back up. And so we're missing out on a very beneficial part of the movement. So full hip extension, opposite arm, opposite leg, and that forward torso lean. We'll go ahead and put 20 seconds on the clock and we'll alternate which leg goes back and that arm that comes forward. And begin. From here, we'll move into our high plank to walkout to back upright. So starting here, we're gonna walk it out. We're gonna pause in this high plank position. During this pause, feel yourself kind of pull your palms down towards your toes. This will help activate the muscles in the front of your body and through your core. Short pause, we'll walk it back to our toes. I like to reach down and back up, just a good stretch through the spine before returning back out into that high plank position. So just walking it out, back up, good stretch down and up. As we walk out into our high plank position, we want to make sure that we're not letting our hips sink down or that we're not stopping here, but that we're getting to a point where there's a nice straight line from our shoulder through our hip, knees down to the ankle bones. So from here, we'll go ahead and put 20 seconds on the clock, walking it out, back up with that good stretch down and up. Here we go. Next up is our pull down to prayer arms. So we're going to start with our palms facing forward, pull down, Bring them together for the prayer arms, and then return back up. As we perform this movement, again, we want to keep a neutral spine. Sometimes people are unable to get into this position where the hands are straight above the midfoot. So straight up without arching their back to compensate because they don't have the full shoulder mobility. If that is you, keep everything in your body locked in neutral, and it's perfectly fine to start out here, and then over time, day by day, week by week, you'll feel your body able to achieve this range of motion without compensating through that low back or lumbar spine. Also, with this movement, it can be really easy to kind of just move through it. There's no resistance. It's a fairly simple movement pattern. So I want you to imagine that you're pulling something down, like you're pulling down the lat pull down bar or doing a pull up, something where you're getting some greater activation into the muscles, especially in the upper back. So pull down, feel that extra resistance, that imaginary resistance, and then return back up. So palms will stay facing forward as you pull. If it helps though, to imagine you're pulling a bar, that's perfectly fine to turn your hands into a grip. We'll go ahead and put 20 seconds on the clock and we'll move our shoulders. From here, we'll just drop our arms down to our side for our shoulder circles. This is a slow, controlled movement where you can feel your shoulders move in big circles backwards and forwards. Oftentimes, especially if we don't have a lot of range of motion, we'll almost rush this or not even try to kind of lengthen or get more range of motion. So that's why if you can slow it down and really feel those big circles, you might find that one side you have it, the other you don't. So really being intentional about both shoulders moving through that full range of motion. We'll perform this one for 10 seconds, one direction, and then we'll switch 10 seconds the other. But again, just relax your arms down by your sides for this and just feel your body move through a good full range of motion. And begin. From here, we'll move into your split stance, A, T's, and Y's. So your split stance is essentially a high lunge position. So we don't want to drop that knee down close to the ground. We want to keep it fairly high. When you step back into this position, just like with the lunge, you want to maintain that hip width base so that you're reaching back. And if you can imagine yourself on train tracks versus a tightrope, then you know you have maintained that hip width position. This will allow you to have some extra stability. One way the body will try to create some extra stability is to rotate and plant this back foot. So go ahead and make sure you're staying up on your tippy toes so we can work some extra muscles in that back leg side. So this will be your starting position. Hands will be out in front of you, and then we'll pull down, forming an A with our arms, returning back to that starting position. So here we're targeting the muscles in our mid and lower traps, so our back muscles. And so we want to make sure that we're not hanging on to tension in through our shoulders. So shoulders stay relaxed, palms come down. From the side, as you bring your arms out, we want to make sure you're not flinging them back behind you. So I like to imagine there's a wall right here at my midline. When I reach that wall, I can generate extra tension by pushing into the wall, but not necessarily by moving past the wall. So feel yourself push the back of your hands into that imaginary wall, and again, return forward. So we'll end up doing 3 A's. I'll show you this from the front. So we'll do 3 A's, then we'll do 3 T's. Now where you're going out to the side, the same thing holds true. Feel that wall or hit that wall, generate tension without flinging your arms back. And then the Y will start low, reach up into that Y position and back down. And you really want to make sure, if you are a shrugger, that as you're coming up into your Y, that you're not crowding that space between your elbow, shoulder, and ear. So I like to think about as my arm comes up, my shoulder actually goes down. And so that's where we'd be firing up those back muscles. So we're gonna get set up in your split stance. We won't use the timer on this one, but we'll do 3 A's, 3 T's, 3 Y's, and then we'll switch sides, or your stance, and another 3 A's, 3 T's, and 3 Y's. So let's go ahead, we'll get set up, and go ahead and follow my lead. The last movement we have during this initial standing segment would be our single leg balance with jumping jack arms. So just like it sounds, we'll start in a single leg balance position, lifting your knee as high as you can without bringing that torso forward. So again, I suggest fixing your eyes on something stationary. And then from there, we'll move your arm through what I like to call jumping jack arms. It's the same movement you would do if you're performing a jumping jack with your arms. This is going to make it a little bit more challenging to balance because you now have added some movement into your body, so you're constantly recalibrating. So single leg balance, we'll do all of our jumping jack arms with one leg up, and then we'll switch, and we'll do that same pattern with the other leg elevated. We're gonna go ahead and do 10 seconds and 10 seconds, and we'll switch halfway through that 20-second interval. So go ahead. We'll get set up here, eyes straight ahead, and begin.